Hello everyone, welcome to the Weeb initiative. I'm your host, the Weeb. This is the show where every other week I'll be talking about anime, manga, and everything in between. This week I'll be talking about following the series I'm making about this trend about ecchi harem redheads with some relation to the underworld that happened in the mid 2010s. This week I'll be talking about the one that I would say the one that fizzled, the one that only had one season and didn't actually continue, if that matters anything. Dakara Boku wa ecchi ga Dekinai, or as it was translated in English, So I Can't Play Ecchi. And just as a brief introduction, I really liked this one when I first watched it back in 2012, but man, rewatching it for this review was such a slog. I will talk more about that later, but simple to say, if I had the blanket statement that I do not recommend any one of these animes I'm talking about, this one specifically, it is pretty bad. So before I even start, let's start with the disclaimers. First off, spoiler alert, I'll be talking about all the story that happens in the anime. I believe it's the whole story, even in the light novel. I may be wrong. I'm probably wrong because the light novel continued to run until 1 year after the anime had finished. But still, I think it more or less wraps things up in the way that follows the light novel. Second disclaimer, I'll be only talking about the anime, not the OVA, not the light novel. I have not read the light novel, neither the manga. And so let's start, because oh boy, this is one review oh my god, it's so dreadful. So what is, before I even start, right, we have to go through the stats. So Dakara Boku, as I will be calling it, was originally a light novel written by Tachibana Pan, illustrated by Katsurai Yoshiaki. It was published by Fujimoto Shobo in Dragon Magazine from June 2010 to August 2013 with 11 volumes. The manga came in October 2011 to December 2013 with 5 volumes, and the anime ran from July 2012 to September 2012, 2 seasons after the first season of High School DxD ever came out. The studio responsible by the adaptation is the studio called Phil. They are a somewhat small studio. They don't have actually that many, say, notable works, but just to set a precedent, I have the list of their catalog of works here, and just to give a feel, they did Kiss Exis in April 2010, Yosuga no Sora 2010, the second season of Oregairu in, I think, 2015, the third season of Oregairu, Nagashi Kashi, and Spy Classroom. The one thing I want you to notice is that the first two that I mentioned, both Kiss Exis and Yosuga no Sora, if you know the precedence of these two anime, you can see that the studio has this, let's say, pedigree into doing ecchi kind of stuff in a way really heavy ecchi. Mainly Yosuga no Sora, Kiss Exis is somewhat more tame, although I would say it's still pretty spicy for an ecchi anime in 2010. That's not the point here, I'm just giving examples of the previous work of the studio. So now that I got the stats out, let's start with the story. The story, I have this to give this introduction before I even start is that the story doesn't actually make any sense. Really, what I will talk about is mostly the the biggest plot points of the whole thing, and basically we'll go from there. I don't actually know how this is gonna work. I think this episode will be really short given everything, because oh my god, this anime is pretty bad. I mean, you need to have your suspension of disbelief really strong in you before you start to watch it, because it doesn't actually make sense. Anyways, let's go. So first episode, we get to meet our main character, Kaga Ryosuke, who's a normal high school student and whatever. He is a pervert, much like in the same vein of Issei from High School DxD, but he's more, let's say, passionate about his perversion. It's hard to me to explain it, but whereas Issei was somewhat, in some ways, let's say, discreet with the way he was perverted, or let's say admiring girls, you can call it whatever you want, Ryosuke is much more open about it, and also he's not only his reactions, but his whole demeanor is way more scandalous than Issei's ever was. At the very least in the anime. I don't actually know if the novels are any different. So we get to meet him, and from then on we get to see the story more or less unfold. As the first episode, he goes back home in the middle of a storm and sees this girl standing there under the rain without an umbrella at the front of his house. And so he takes her inside, and she kind of tips him off as, how do I say that in English? Flirts with him, more or less. And she's a redhead and whatever. And when he notices, she stabs him with broken sword, and he basically falls down and whatever. And the whole thing is really out of the blue, let's say. It really doesn't explain anything. So he passes out, and when he sees it, he's all normal and whatever. And so she begins to explain that actually her name is Lisara Restor, and she's a Green Reaper that comes from the Green Reaper world. And the broken sword kind of business is their way to sustain themselves in the human world. So Green Reapers, for some reason, need this life energy that we humans produce, and in order to her to stay, let's say, not only active but healthy and with her powers in the human world, she has to do this contract, which is not really a contract if it's let's say it's kind of forced. Let's say she just stabs the guy and the contract is done. I don't actually understand the premises of it, but whatever. The thing is, he then enters in this contract with her, and from the get-go, I don't like her as a character. Much like I talk again and again, tsunderes are really cute, but the tsunderes that are too stubborn for their own good, in general, I begin to not liking them. And Lisara is one of the cases that she's really stubborn in a really, really bad way. So much so that the chemistry between Ryosuke, being this scandalous kind of guy that admires life and wants to see the beautiful things that mostly women in his life and whatever, with her, and obviously she does not approve of his perversion. You can see where this goes, and obviously one of the main gags of the whole anime is that he always ends up being punched, kicked, something's thrown at him, and so on and so forth. And he just shrugs it off, let's say. He maybe bleeding from his head and whatever, but he keeps on going and being this perfect because he's a happy-go-lucky type of guy. And the chemistry in general doesn't actually work, in my opinion, but that's how things work, right? And so she imposes that she will be living with him from now on because she has this really special mission about finding a special specimen, a human that can provide a lot of energy. And so basically they, as a Green Reaper, Lysera has this amulet on her wrist that can more or less measure the energy inside of a person. And Yosuke, although it's a small type of energy, he's an average guy, a below average guy more or less, we will end up finding out that he has a special power more or less later on. But before I even begin with that, let's get one thing more out of the way. One of the parts that lead Ryosuke to accept more or less to the conditions that Lysera puts on him, the contract, her living with him and whatever, is because Lysera, as a Green Reaper, she can more or less predict. She knows the date that a person will die, because everyone that is born in the human world, at the moment of birth, their date of death is also pre-written, let's say. And so she tells Ryosuke that he only has 3 months of living, but if they can find this special specimen may help Ryosuke to overwrite the date and maybe survive, let's say. And so the basically it starts like this, and at the very first episode we already have first fight, unidentified form of bioweapon, something like that, invades Yosuke's home. And so we get presented with the, let's say, the modus operandi of the battles inside his anime. So Lysera has a whole lot of, let's say, spells, skills that she uses. One to create a field around the enemies, so they basically are transported to a pocket dimension, so they more or less create a barrier between their fighting space and the real space. And basically she starts to fight. She summons her powers, a whole new outfit, a giant scythe, and this whole demon Green Reaper kind of aesthetic. Also, she's from the fire element that they don't actually explain a lot in the anime, but all her abilities are based on fire and whatever. She fights it out with the bioweapon, and until a point that we get to see the one more part of the mechanic that ends up being one of the forms that the anime introduces a lot of fan service, a lot of ecchi inside the whole formula, is that the energy that Lysera has to fight is fleeting, is really small, a really small capacity of carrying energy to fight. And so eventually her attacks become duller, her outfit starts to tear, and she basically loses her powers at some point. And to recharge it, she needs to touch Ryosuke's hand, because she basically needs to extract more energy from his contract. And basically he has a little, as I already said, below average amount of energy inside of him. But then we find out that there's one thing that recharges his batteries really quickly, and with let's say an overcharge, that is ecchi, the Eros pervert stuff. So as I already mentioned, her clothes start to tear apart, and this is one of the anime that actually shows boobs, and you can see where this goes, right? He eventually somewhat unintentionally touches her boobs, and so he is overcharged, and she can basically recharge her whole capacity and blow the bioweapon away. They blow up the house also. His house is blown up in the middle of the fight, but she can actually reconstruct it with the amount of energy she got from him, and the anime basically starts from there. The whole thing starts from this. Now, at this point, I glossed over a big detail actually. There is also another character, another girl from the harem that we get introduced in the first episode. That is Okura Mina. That is the childhood friend of Ryosuke. And from the get-go, we get to see that she has feelings for him, whereas he does not respond to them. And this becomes a plot point later. But for the sake of the first episode, she more or less just sees that he starts to live with Lisara, and yeah, she becomes kind of jealous. From episode 2, we get introduced to Zeria Kyuru, or Kyuru Zeria. I don't actually know if the surname is changed position or whatever. They use a whole lot of different names, the different, let's say, nationalities of names. So, for instance, Kyuru, I don't actually know the translation for our alphabet or Romaji, because from just on the 12 episodes that I saw that back then were translated from different groups, they each wrote Kyuru differently, some with K, some with Q. Here in the Wikipedia article, they are written with QU, so I don't actually know. And whatever, the point is, we get introduced to Kyuru in the second episode. That is a distant cousin of Lisara. Lisara is from a noble family of the Green Reaper world, and Kyuru is younger, distant cousin from a branch family, and she starts being an antagonist for the episode, but ends up becoming an ally later on, as Lisara defeats her in a fight, and she helps Lisara to find this special specimen or whatever. From then on, I don't actually remember if in the third or fourth episode we get introduced to last main girl of the harem, that is Fukumune Iria. And she's like Lisara's rival from school. So basically, she's also a Green Reaper that works for one of the big, I think, enterprises from the Green Reaper world that actually acts inside the human world. It's never explained really how the whole thing works, but basically she's an employee for a corporation that eventually becomes the antagonist later on, but whatever. And from then on, we get to see this whole journey about Lisara trying to find this special specimen, and the whole beginning of the harem, because Lisara doesn't actually have feelings for Ryosuke at the beginning, but eventually Mina already has feelings for Ryosuke. Then Kyuru eventually develops this feelings also, and later on, as things progress, Mina gets captured by let's say, a bigger opponent at this point, and goes to the Green Reaper world, and then we have this whole fight and infighting because Iria betrays Lisara for a moment, and the whole thing is a big old mess. And then we find out that Mina actually is the special specimen, and basically what happens is, at the final fight in the, I think, episode 10, Ryosuke basically destroys the gate between the human world and the Green Reaper world, and so both worlds are fused, and the Green Reapers start a war against the humans, because for one reason or another, one of the ancient Green Reapers gave the humans the power to keep on living, although the humans should be extinct at this point. It's really a real mess. It's not really well explained. I'm just throwing it out there because at the end of the anime, there is this whole thing about Ryosuke dying and Lisara for once breaking the tsundere mode. She goes in there, almost dies, throwing her soul together with his through the sword that Mina has a contract with Kyuru. The whole thing is a mishmash with a lot of things, and ends up saving Ryosuke and more or less reviving him, overwriting his death date. And with this, one of the Green Reapers that is outside of the harem, seeing Lisara save Ryosuke, she has this idea that actually there is a greater power than the life energy from humans when they die. That is the energy of sorrow and whatever. That is the energy of happiness, and that people can produce it while alive, so the Green Reapers can actually coexist with the humans in a symbiotic relationship. And this is basically the story. I glossed over a whole lot of minor details that actually piles up into the last fight, but given everything, I don't actually think I need to explain it much. And now I can go on to both my opinion and more technical review for this anime. So, what did I think about the anime? Watching it was a slog. So, as I already said, Lisara is way too stubborn for her own good. She's a character that I don't vibe with, as a whole lot of other characters I already reviewed in this show, but whatever. Second thing, the whole explanation for everything is really badly done. It's a real... Any explanation that they try to use is either has really large plot holes, or the explanation doesn't actually exist. The powers are never explained. The whole thing is just a throw everything together and send it kind of deal. The pacing is terrible. Comedic timing is awful. The comedic timing is mostly Ryosuke either giving a comment, a funny comment, let's say, a perfect comment inside of something, or something really just absurd. At some point, there is this whole arc where Ryosuke has to train himself to recharge his batteries faster, and so he starts basically training his imagination to not need actually outside stimuli to actually build his energy, and so he trains his imagination and whatever. And the whole montage about this, the whole arc, not only the presentation but the results also, are really just absurd. It becomes really annoying at some point because it just doesn't actually make sense. Also, there is this one side arc that happens that actually they find out that a broken sword that Lisara used on Ryosuke is actually Ryosuke had the other half, because apparently his father was a Green Reaper that came to Earth and with his mother gave birth to him, and that's never addressed. Like, what the hell? His father was like part of a noble family of the Green Reaper or whatever, so what the hell? Never addressed. The whole thing is a mess. The whole presentation is a mess. Two other points that really like drove me nuts is the first one is that Mina is the childhood friend, and she, for the most part, is the most important as a plot, let's say, as a love interest in my eyes at the very least, because she actually likes Ryosuke from the get-go, and she's always there, and it really feels bad when she sees that Lisara starts to like Ryosuke and just let her be. There's not actually a fight there, which I feel it should. It would actually add some tension to the romance, because at this point the romance is one required love, because Lisara doesn't actually like Ryosuke for the most of the anime, and the whole thing is bad. The whole thing doesn't actually have tension, doesn't actually have stakes to anything at all, and this just drives me nuts, because I think Mina actually deserved it, as she's a better character than Lisara, but still she doesn't actually get to be with the guy at the end because she's the childhood friend, and this is the most important, one of the most important flags that we can set on. I mean, the author sets on it. I don't actually believe that you need to follow this kind of flag, but so is life. The second thing, and this one is, oh boy, it's so bad. There's this one part where they go into the Green Reaper world where Ryosuke basically suffers a trauma of nearly being killed by a monster, and he basically loses himself. He loses his happy-go-lucky attitude. He loses his whole composure as a main character and whatever. He becomes afraid of anything and scared of everything and so on and so forth. So he cannot give Lisara energy anymore, and he cannot do any pervert things anymore. One of the things that really pisses me off is that the trauma is not really there, because the situation is not really that traumatic. Because he had so many people to protect him at that point, he had no reason to be traumatized for that. And not only that, but at this point, Hiro, as a way to help him regain his pervertness, his perversion, she basically offers herself to him, and he declines, which was, oh my god, man, are you fucking serious? Just in my opinion, really bad way to introduce it, because the trauma is not really that big of a deal, but still, that's the thing. And so overall, the anime is bad. The anime is bad. It's not really a good thing to say. What can I say about this anime? I think the story is terrible. The pacing is bad. The comedic timing of everything is bad. The comedic sense of the whole thing is bad. I don't know if I matured out of it, but the boobs jokes kind of lost their funny element, let's say. Given that being said, I have to give credit where credit's due. The animation is at the very least competent, given that they don't actually enter in a lot of hand-to-hand combat, but more or less just projectile and beams, flames, so on and so forth. But that's not here nor there, but the animation in general is pretty okay. And also the art design of the characters, I have to actually give credit. All the characters are, except for Ryosuke, because Ryosuke is the out of the shelf main character of a harem anime. The girls have really good designs, not only the main girls, but the side characters that we get to meet. So the other Green Reaper, we get even to see Lisara's mom, and the character design is really well done. The animation is competent. The music is not something to write home about. It's really, let's say, above average. Opening, the ending, I thought it was really, I don't actually have strong opinions about it. The ending is pretty meh. The opening is above average, but not by much. It has a vibe. It's good in that sense. But again, the anime gets undermined by its weak story, weak pacing, terrible comedic timing. Mainly at the beginning. The beginning is terrible. Ryosuke, at some points, I really wish he would just shut up, because his comments are way out there, and at some points you wish he would take more hits for how much shit he talks, because it becomes annoying. That's the point. And now, why does this fit on the theme? So, as I said, 2 seasons after the first season of High School DxD, the main girl is a redhead. that is a noble from the underworld. She has powers, and the whole magic thing in this normal ass setting, and the harem that eventually forms around the main character. The main character has some kind of special power aside from what we can see initially. The whole thing is really derivative of High School DxD in some ways, but I don't actually believe it is, because the timing on the publications kind of different, so I don't think that it may be an inspiration but not derivative from it. And basically the anime is a mess. I don't actually recommend it, but to present this whole theme about the H-harem of the 2010s, I feel like it's one of the contenders to be presented side by side with High School DxD 27, and the one that we will cover in the next episode, that is Shimaima Uno Testament, and later on the 4th season of High School DxD, but that's when we get there. So that's about it. Thank you for listening to my rambles to this whole mess of show. I know the review is not really that in depth, but the anime doesn't actually give me much depth to go into anyways. Not only that, but oh my god, I really struggled to finish this one. The whole thing is a mess. It doesn't actually give me the will to continue watching for the most of it. There's a part there from the 4th to the 6th episode that really is okay, but outside from that, I don't actually think that the anime is really worth watching. So again, that's about it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching if you are on YouTube. If you like the show, if you like what I do, if you like this whole thing about the Weeb initiative, please like, please follow, please share, please subscribe. Depending on the platform you're in, please join the Discord. And as the last time I will talk about this, it's been more than a month now as this episode is coming out. I think I've posted video about Oshinoko in the YouTube channel, so if you could watch it and give me some feedback about it, I would love to see it, because I want to do more videos like it to explore different topics that I don't actually get to talk much about here in the podcast. And so again, thank you for listening. I hope you stick around. Bye.